Minnesota looks quiet on the surface, prairie, riverbanks, cold shorelines, but the ground holds questions that have never been settled. What if the most important chapters of this region's history were written without ink, and we no longer know how to read them? Who carved thousands of figures into ancient quartzite and returned to the same stone across centuries? Why build a massive earthwork beside the rainy river with a tail-like extension that still resists a single explanation? And why cut symbols at Lake Superior's waterline, where the lake can hide them for most of the year? If these mysteries are real, what knowledge vanished with the people who understood them? Minnesota is rarely associated with ancient mystery. There are no towering ruins, no stone cities rising above the landscape. What exists instead is subtler and far more difficult to interpret. The evidence here lies close to the ground, carved into bedrock, shaped from soil, or embedded in shorelines that shift with the seasons. These are traces that survived not because they were monumental, but because they were overlooked. The cultures that lived in this region for thousands of years did not record their knowledge in permanent texts. Meaning was carried through oral tradition, ritual practice, repeated movement across the land, and symbols understood within a living community. When those communities changed, migrated, or disappeared, the physical traces remained, but the instructions for reading them did not. This creates a specific kind of archaeological problem. The sites still exist. They can be measured, dated, mapped, and protected. But interpretation stops short of certainty. Each location offers multiple plausible explanations, none strong enough to close the question entirely. The result is not mystery born from lack of evidence, but mystery created by lost context. Across Minnesota, the same pattern appears again and again. Places that were clearly important over long periods of time. Sites revisited by multiple generations. Landscapes shaped with deliberate effort. Resources extracted and traded across vast distances. Symbols placed where light, water, or season determines whether they can even be seen. Individually, none of these discoveries overturn established history. They do not prove unknown civilizations or impossible technologies. That is not their significance. Their importance lies in what they collectively suggest, that human societies here were observant, organized, spiritually complex, and deeply connected to their environment, yet left behind systems of meaning that were fragile. Stone can endure for millions of years. Soil structures can last for centuries. But understanding does not survive unless it is actively passed on. When that chain breaks, what remains is evidence without explanation. The 10 sites in this story share that condition. They are not abandoned ruins. They are not hidden myths. They are places where archaeology reaches its limits, not because science has failed, but because history itself is incomplete. What follows is not an attempt to solve these mysteries. It is an examination of where certainty ends and why. The first of these places begins with a single stretch of ancient rock, marked again and again by hands that return to it for reasons we can no longer fully recover. 1. Jeffers petroglyphs, a stone record written across centuries. At first glance, the site appears unremarkable. A broad, flat surface of exposed stone rises gently from the prairie in southwestern Minnesota. There are no walls, no markers visible from a distance, nothing that signals importance. But when light moves low across the rock, the surface changes. Shapes emerge slowly. Animals, weapons, human figures, abstract lines, carved directly into the stone. Jeffers petroglyphs contains thousands of individual carvings etched into Sioux quartzite, a rock formed nearly 2 billion years ago. The carvings themselves are far younger but still ancient. Archaeological evidence suggests they were created over a span of more than 2,000 years, possibly longer. This is not the work of a single group, a single moment, or a single purpose. That long span is the site's defining feature. The carvings were added generation after generation. New symbols appear beside older ones. Familiar images, bison, spear throwers, human figures in motion, sit next to geometric forms whose meaning no longer has a clear reference point. There is no obvious narrative order. No beginning or end. This accumulation suggests a continuity. People did not come here once and leave. They returned. They recognized the place as significant enough to add to, rather than erase. In doing so, They treated the rock not as a blank surface, but as a shared record. Some carvings resemble hunting scenes. Others appear tied to ceremony or belief, including figures often associated with sky or thunder symbolism in Plains cultures. A smaller number of markings have been interpreted as possible astronomical references, shaped by careful observation of seasonal light and shadow. None of these interpretations can be confirmed with certainty. They remain grounded but incomplete. What is clear is that the site was not casual. Carving quartzite requires effort, planning, and intent. Each mark represents time spent in one place, shaping meaning into stone. The choice to do this repeatedly, across centuries, implies that Jeffers petroglyphs functioned as more than a canvas. It was a location where memory was preserved physically, even as its explanations remained oral. Today, the carvings survive, but the system that explained them does not. We can document their form, their distribution, and their age. We can compare motifs and study wear patterns, but we cannot fully reconstruct how ancient visitors understood what they were seeing, or why certain symbols mattered more than others. Jeffers petroglyphs stands as evidence of sustained cultural attention. It does not tell us exactly what was believed here. It shows something quieter and more difficult to replace. A place where meaning was once shared so completely that it never needed to be written down. 2. Grand Mound, an earthwork that refuses a single purpose. Along the Rainy River in northern Minnesota, the landscape appears calm and unassuming. Forest, water, low ground, shaped by slow seasonal change. Within this setting lies the Grand Mound, a massive earthwork that does not dominate the horizon, yet carries a weight that is immediately felt when seen up close. The mound stretches roughly 140 feet in length and rises gradually from the surrounding terrain. It is not steep or dramatic. Its scale reveals itself only through time and proximity. Archaeological evidence places its construction more than 2,000 years ago, attributed to the Laurel culture, a woodland period society that left few enduring records beyond stone tools, pottery fragments, and earthworks like this one. That scarcity of material context is central to the mystery. The Grand Mound was clearly built with intention. Moving and shaping this volume of earth required coordinated labor, planning, and a shared reason strong enough to justify sustained effort. Yet the site offers no written explanation, no surviving oral account directly tied to its builders, and no layout that resolves into a single accepted function. Burials have been identified within the mound, but most researchers agree it was not simply a cemetery. Its scale exceeds what would be necessary for that purpose alone. The surrounding area once contained additional mounds, arranged without an obvious geometric pattern, suggesting the site operated as a complex rather than an isolated structure. One feature draws particular attention: a long, narrow extension projecting from the main body of the mound toward the river. From some angles, it resembles the body of a serpent. From others, it appears closer to a raised pathway or ceremonial approach. Some interpretations see symbolic meaning. Others argue it may reflect natural landforms deliberately enhanced by human hands. No explanation accounts for every detail. Astronomical alignment has been proposed, as has seasonal gathering, ritual procession, or social ceremony. The mound does show signs of intentional orientation, but nothing precise enough to confirm a specific calendar or celestial event. As with many woodland earthworks, the evidence supports possibility rather than conclusion. Today, the Grand Mound is protected. Direct access is restricted out of respect for its cultural significance and the burials it contains. Standing nearby, the impression is not of abandonment but of dormancy. The mound does not feel forgotten. It feels unresolved. The Grand Mound reminds us that complexity does not always announce itself through architecture. Sometimes it is expressed through restraint, through forms that resist interpretation because their meaning was once shared and no longer is. 3. Knife River Flint Quarries, the trade network without a map. At first, the Knife River Flint Quarries do not look like a center of power. There are no deep shafts, no stone walls, no permanent structures rising from the ground. Instead, the prairie surface is marked by shallow depressions and scattered fragments of dark stone, quiet traces of activity that once shaped life across an entire continent. Knife River flint is distinctive. Dark, fine-grained, and unusually predictable when struck, it can be worked into sharp, reliable tools. For thousands of years, this material was prized by toolmakers. Spear points, knives, scrapers, and later arrowheads made from it appear far beyond its geological source, across the Great Plains, through the Midwest, into Canada, and as far east as the Appalachian region. This distribution reveals something critical. Long before metal, long before roads, people were connected through vast exchange networks. Knife River flint did not travel by accident. It moved through systems of trade, negotiation, and repeated contact between groups who may not have shared language or customs. The quarry itself reflects this scale without announcing it. Hundreds of shallow pits mark places where flint was extracted. Surrounding them are dense scatters of waste flakes, evidence of tool production on site. Some areas show signs of repeated use over centuries. Others suggest specialization, where raw stone was shaped into finished or semi-finished tools before being carried away. What remains unclear is how access was organized. There is no evidence of fortification, ownership markers, or permanent settlement controlling the quarry. Was it governed by a single group? Was it neutral ground, respected by many? Did families return generation after generation, or was access negotiated anew each time? Archaeology can document the volume of material moved and the skill involved in its production. It can track changes in tool style over time, showing how the same stone adapted to new hunting strategies and technologies. What it cannot fully recover is the social system that kept the quarry active for so long. Most ancient quarries eventually lose importance. Materials change, routes shift, demand fades. Knife River flint did not. Its value endured across cultures and centuries, suggesting that it was more than a practical resource. Some researchers have proposed symbolic or ceremonial importance, noting its frequent presence in burial contexts. Today, the site feels quiet. Grass covers the pits. Wind moves steadily across the open land. But beneath that calm lies evidence of sustained coordination and trust on a continental scale. The Knife River flint quarries represent a kind of infrastructure that leaves no monuments, only connections preserved in stone. 4. Lake Superior hidden water glyphs. Along the rocky shores of Lake Superior, there are places where stone meets water in a narrow, shifting boundary. The lake rises and falls with the seasons. Waves grind against basalt ledges. Ice expands and fractures rock each winter. It is an environment defined by erosion, not preservation. And yet, it is here that some of Minnesota's most elusive carvings appear. These markings, often called water glyphs, are etched directly into stone at or near the waterline. Many are submerged for much of the year. Others are visible only when the lake level drops or when sunlight strikes the rock at a precise angle. Lines, grooves, spirals, simplified figures, and channel-like forms emerge briefly, then disappear again beneath the surface. Dating these carvings is extremely difficult. Constant wave action erodes the stone. Shorelines shift. Context is repeatedly disturbed. What can be said with confidence is limited. The markings are deliberate, not random fractures, and some resemble rock art traditions found elsewhere around the Lake Superior Basin. Their placement is the central mystery. Why carve symbols in locations where they are so easily obscured? One explanation is practical, that these marks served as guides, indicating canoe routes, safe landings, or seasonal pathways across the lake. Lake Superior has long functioned as a transportation corridor, and simple visual markers could have carried real value. Another interpretation is ceremonial. In many indigenous traditions, water is not just a resource but a boundary between states of being. Placing symbols where water repeatedly reveals and conceals them may have been intentional. The act of appearing and vanishing could itself carry meaning, tied to cycles, offerings, or spiritual thresholds. Not all glyphs fit neatly into either explanation. Some shapes do not match known regional motifs. Others appear sharper than expected, raising questions about whether they were refreshed or reworked by later generations. Without continuous documentation, it is impossible to separate original carvings from possible additions. Today, these glyphs remain largely undocumented in public detail. Revealing exact locations risks damage, whether from curiosity or unintentional harm. Preservation depends as much on restraint as on research. As a result, the glyphs exist in a state of partial visibility, known but not fully shared. Standing along the shoreline, the effect is subtle. There is no sense of monument, no clear message announces itself. Instead, the lake itself becomes part of the record, deciding when the markings may be seen. These carvings do not demand attention. They wait for it. The water glyphs of Lake Superior challenge a basic assumption of archaeology, that meaning is meant to endure. Here, meaning may have been designed to move in and out of reach, shaped as much by water as by stone. 5. Pipestone National Monument, Sacred Stone and the Question of Shared Ground. In southwestern Minnesota, the land breaks open to reveal a vein of soft red stone unlike any other in the region. Known as catlinite or pipestone, this material has been quarried for centuries to create ceremonial pipes used in prayer, diplomacy, and ritual. The quarry is not simply a resource, it is a place set apart. For many indigenous nations, pipestone was considered sacred long before modern boundaries existed. Oral traditions describe it as neutral ground, a location where different groups could gather, extract stone, and depart without conflict. That idea alone suggests a powerful shared agreement, maintained without written law, fortification, or permanent oversight. The stone itself explains part of its value. Catlinite is soft enough to carve, yet durable once shaped. Pipes made from it were not everyday tools. They were carried, exchanged, and used in moments of consequence, councils, treaties, ceremonies marking life, death, and transition. Objects created here traveled far beyond Minnesota, carrying meaning that extended well beyond the quarry. What complicates the story are the markings and features found in and around the site. Some carvings and stone arrangements do not fit neatly into known artistic traditions. Others appear symbolic rather than practical. Because the quarry was used repeatedly over long periods, separating one cultural layer from another is difficult. Later activity may have overwritten or repurposed earlier meaning. There is also the question of boundaries. If this was truly neutral ground, how was that neutrality enforced? There are no defensive structures, no clear territorial markers, no evidence of centralized control. And yet, the quarry remained accessible across generations. That stability suggests a system of shared belief strong enough to regulate behavior without physical barriers. Modern protection of the site adds another layer of complexity. Quarrying is now restricted to preserve what remains. The stone endures, but the social framework that governed its use does not. As a result, pipestone becomes more than a sacred resource. It becomes evidence of an agreement we can no longer see, but once clearly understood. The quarry does not explain itself. It does not need to. Its significance lies in what it demonstrates, that cooperation, restraint, and shared meaning once shaped this landscape as deliberately as any monument. From here, the story turns to places where even the physical evidence has begun to disappear, leaving behind questions formed not by what survives, but by what has already been erased. 6. Lake Mille Lacs Lost Mound Sites. Around Lake Mille Lacs, the land appears ordinary. Fields, tree lines, gently sloping ground shaped by farming and settlement. But historical records from the 19th century describe a very different landscape. Early surveyors and antiquarians documented numerous earthen mounds scattered throughout this region, many of them clustered near the lake's shoreline and tributaries. Today, most of those mounds no longer exist. They were leveled gradually, not through deliberate destruction, but through routine use of the land. Agriculture flattened them, roads cut through them, development absorbed them. By the time archaeology became systematic and protective measures were established, many of these features had already disappeared. This creates a rare kind of mystery, one defined not by what remains, but by what is missing. The original accounts suggest that the mounds varied in size and form. Some were low and rounded, others were elongated. A few were noted as burial sites, though documentation was limited and inconsistent by modern standards. No comprehensive excavation was carried out before the landscape changed. As a result, The cultural affiliations, functions, and time periods of many of these mounds remain uncertain. What makes the Mille Lacs region especially important is its long history as a center of indigenous life. The lake supported fishing, trade, seasonal movement, and ceremony for centuries. It is unlikely that the mounds were isolated or incidental. They were almost certainly part of a broader system of land use and belief. But because so few physical traces survive, archaeology here must work backward, from maps, notes, and memory. Even modern techniques, such as aerial analysis and ground surveys, can only recover fragments. A mound that no longer rises above the soil leaves little to detect. This absence forces a difficult acknowledgement. Archaeological knowledge does not depend solely on time and erosion. It is also shaped by timing, by whether questions are asked before evidence is gone. The lost mounds of Lake Mille Lacs do not offer symbols to interpret or structures to measure. They offer a different lesson, that entire chapters of history can vanish quietly, not because they were insignificant, but because they were integrated too completely into living landscapes. Here, the mystery is not what ancient people built. It is how much has already slipped beyond recovery, and how that loss limits what we can ever know. 7. Spirit Island, a sacred place without monuments. Spirit Island sits near the mouth of the St. Louis River, where fresh water meets Lake Superior. It is small, low, and easily overlooked. There are no towering structures, no visible ruins, no earthworks rising from the ground. From a purely material perspective, it appears unremarkable. And yet, for the Ojibwe people, this island has long been understood as a place of profound spiritual importance. According to oral tradition, Spirit Island is associated with origins, transition, and presence. It is a place connected to the movement of spirits rather than the movement of people. That distinction matters. The island was never meant to host permanent settlement or monumental construction. Its significance was carried through story, practice, and restriction, not architecture. This presents a challenge for archaeology. Modern interpretation relies heavily on physical traces, structures, tools, altered landscapes. Spirit Island offers very little of that. There are no clear habitation layers, no ceremonial platforms, no dense artifact scatters. What remains is location, continuity of belief, and the persistence of meaning through memory rather than material. To dismiss such a place as empty would be a mistake. Sacred landscapes are not always shaped by addition. Sometimes they are defined by what is intentionally left untouched. The absence of construction may itself be evidence of restraint, signaling a boundary between ordinary land and space set apart. Spirit Island forces a reassessment of how history is measured. If significance is determined only by what survives physically, then places like this disappear from the record. But if cultural continuity is considered evidence, then Spirit Island represents something rare, a site whose meaning endured precisely because it was not fixed into stone or soil. The island's story has survived through people, not through objects, and that survival highlights a limitation in historical reconstruction. Not all important places were designed to leave traces that last. Some were meant to remain quiet, known only to those who understood their role. Spirit Island stands as a reminder that history is not always written into the land. Sometimes it is carried across generations in ways that leave no marks at all, except in memory. 8. Kensington Runestone, when an artifact exists without its context. In 1898, a farmer working land near Kensington, Minnesota, uncovered a stone slab covered in unfamiliar markings. The inscription was later identified as runic script, associated with medieval Scandinavia, and appeared to describe a group of Norse explorers traveling inland in the year 1362. If taken at face value, the stone would place Europeans deep in the interior of North America more than a century before Columbus. The object itself is real. The markings exist. The stone can be examined, measured, and preserved. What remains unresolved is everything around it. From the beginning, scholars questioned the find. Linguistic details in the inscription do not align cleanly with known medieval runic usage. Certain word forms appear inconsistent with the period they claim to represent. Geological analysis suggests the carvings could be much more recent than the date inscribed. Over time, the prevailing academic view has leaned toward the stone being a 19th century creation. And yet, the debate has never fully settled. Supporters of the stone's authenticity point to regional Scandinavian immigration, unexplained linguistic overlaps, and the absence of a clear motive for fabrication at the time of discovery. Critics respond that coincidence and cultural influence are not evidence, and that extraordinary claims require a chain of supporting context, additional artifacts, settlement traces, or independent confirmation. None of those have been found. This tension reveals why the Kensington runestone remains significant even without acceptance. It demonstrates a fundamental rule of historical interpretation. An artifact alone is not history. Objects require context. They need to be anchored within a broader pattern of evidence that supports their origin, purpose, and meaning. The runestone sits at the intersection of possibility and proof. It is not dismissed because it is impossible, but because it stands isolated. Without corroboration, it cannot responsibly reshape established timelines. In that sense, the Kensington runestone is less a mystery about Vikings than a lesson about limits. It shows how easily a single object can capture public imagination, and how carefully history must separate fascination from confirmation. Here, the uncertainty is not a failure of research, it is the result of discipline, and that restraint defines the boundary between what can be suggested and what can be claimed. 9. Minnesota River Valley, Stone Features. Scattered throughout sections of the Minnesota River Valley are stone features that resist easy classification. Low alignments, circular or linear arrangements. Stones placed in ways that appear intentional, yet subtle enough to be dismissed at first glance. They do not resemble fortifications. They do not fit agricultural patterns, and they do not form structures meant for shelter. Some researchers refer to these features as petroforms, stones deliberately arranged to create shapes, outlines, or spatial markers. Similar features are known in other parts of the upper Midwestern plains, sometimes associated with ceremonial use, territorial marking, or celestial observation. In Minnesota, however, documentation is limited, and many features were recorded only briefly before erosion, farming, or development altered the land. The difficulty lies in interpretation. Stone can move naturally. Freeze-thaw cycles, flooding, and glacial legacy can create patterns that appear designed. Distinguishing human intention from geological coincidence requires context, associated artifacts, repeated forms, or cultural continuity. In many cases, that context is incomplete or missing. Where intentionality seems likely, function remains uncertain. Some alignments may correspond loosely to solstices or cardinal directions. Others appear to frame open space rather than enclose it, suggesting use tied to movement or gathering rather than defense. None provide the clarity needed for firm conclusions. These stone features occupy an uncomfortable middle ground, too subtle to command attention, too deliberate to ignore entirely. They sit between certainty and dismissal, reminding us that not all cultural expression aimed to be permanent or obvious. If these stones once held meaning, that meaning depended on shared understanding, on people knowing where to stand, when to arrive, and what to observe. Without that knowledge, the stones become quiet again. Their presence is real, their message is not. 10. Hill Annex Mine, a landscape rewritten and what lies beneath it. The Hill Annex Mine is not ancient. It is a product of the industrial age, carved into Minnesota's iron-rich Mesabi Range during the 20th century. The open pit is vast, descending in stepped layers that expose millions of years of geological history. It represents labor, extraction, and modern transformation of the land. Its relevance to ancient mystery lies not in its age, but in its impact. Before industrial mining reshaped this region, the landscape existed in a different form, one known to indigenous communities long before ore was extracted. Oral histories describe areas that were approached with caution or avoided entirely, not because of visible danger, but because of perceived presence or significance tied to the land itself. Large-scale excavation permanently altered those surfaces. Soil layers were removed. Natural contours were erased. Any subtle traces that may have existed before mining Stone arrangements, low earthworks, activity areas would have been destroyed or buried without record. What remains visible now is only the industrial scar. This raises a difficult question. How much ancient history can be lost without ever being recognized as such? Archaeology depends on survival. Sites must persist long enough to be noticed, studied, and protected. Industrial landscapes rarely allow that. When extraction accelerates faster than investigation, entire chapters of human interaction with a place can vanish unnoticed. Hill Annex Mine stands as a boundary between eras. Above it, modern history is documented in detail. Below it, earlier stories may be gone entirely. The mine does not hide its transformation, it exposes it. In that exposure lies its significance. It reminds us that history is not only shaped by time, but by decisions. And once land is rewritten at this scale, the past beneath it may never speak again. When the evidence remains, but the meaning does not. Taken one by one, none of these sites overturns established history. They do not prove lost civilizations, unknown technologies, or forgotten empires hidden beneath Minnesota's soil. That is not what they offer. What they reveal is something quieter and more unsettling. Across stone, earth, water, and landscape, the same pattern repeats. People return to specific places again and again. They shaped rock with intent. They moved earth with coordination. They exchanged materials across vast distances. They marked boundaries, passages, and moments that mattered to them. These actions required planning, shared understanding, and belief systems strong enough to endure across generations. And yet, those systems did not last. Meaning faded faster than stone. Context disappeared faster than structures. Oral traditions broke. Languages shifted. Landscapes were altered. What survived were fragments, carvings without explanations, mounds without stories, resources without records, sacred places without monuments. This does not weaken archaeology, it defines its limits. History is not a complete record. It is a reconstruction assembled from what survived erosion, development, neglect, and chance. What we can study today is shaped as much by what endured as by what was lost before anyone knew to look. In Minnesota, the land itself decides which stories remain visible. A carving appears only when light strikes at the right angle. A glyph surfaces only when water recedes. A mound vanishes once farming flattens it. A sacred place leaves no trace at all. These mysteries do not demand belief, they demand humility. They remind us that ancient cultures were not simple, and that knowledge is fragile when it is not preserved intentionally. And they leave us with a final question, one that reaches beyond Minnesota itself. If so much meaning can disappear while the evidence remains, what will the future make of us once our own context is gone? The stones may last, but understanding is never guaranteed.